The government's first response to the atrocity at Bondi was not accountability. It was not reflection. It was not honesty. It was deflection. It was to reach for the nearest political shield and hide behind it. That shield was law-abiding firearm owners. That is disgraceful, that is cowardly, and it is utterly dishonest. When I say this, I speak on behalf of 260,000 law-abiding firearm owners in this state. Licensed firearm owners did not radicalise the offenders. We did not create the conditions that led to this attack. We were not the ones who marched across the Harbour Bridge celebrating and excusing extremist regimes. We were not the ones who stood shoulder to shoulder in Hyde Park every weekend while chants of global intifada rang out. We were not the ones who wore tokenistic keffiyehs, waved flags or virtue signalled while radicalism was allowed to fester in plain sight. We did not enable this. We were not the ones who dismissed the warnings. We were not the ones who chose political comfort over public safety. We were not the ones who ignored the advice of our own security agencies. And that risk was known. The warnings were clear, and yet state and federal governments did nothing. Nothing until the moment came when the public demanded answers. And instead of looking inward, instead of confronting their own failures, the government chose to look sideways. They chose to point the finger at 260,000 law-abiding firearm owners, Australians who do the right thing every single day. Farmers, sporting shooters, hunters, collectors, regional Australians, people who comply with the law, people who submit to background checks, to inspections, to licensing requirements, to ongoing scrutiny, people who are already the most regulated citizens in this state. The blame for this atrocity does not rest with them. It does not rest with the people who store their firearms correctly. It does not rest with the people who follow the rules. The responsibility rests elsewhere. It rests with those who ignored the warnings, with those who tolerated extremism, with those who allowed social cohesion to fracture because confronting it was politically inconvenient. If you marched, if you cheered, if you wore the symbols, if you looked the other way, then you enabled this climate. You can wash your hands all you like, but the blood of those victims will stain you forever. And now, after all of that, you come here and introduce a rushed, reactionary firearms legislation and pretend it makes anyone safer. It doesn't, it won't, and the people you are targeting know it, especially the Jewish community. This legislation does nothing to stop extremism, nothing to prevent radicalisation, nothing to address the failures that led us here. All it does is punish the compliant and distract from the truth. Licensed firearm owners refuse to be your scapegoat, refuse to be the scapegoat for this government's incompetence. They refuse to carry the burden of failures that they did not create. They refuse to be tarred with the same brush as criminals and extremists. You are not free of responsibility. Your conscience is not clean. No amount of political theatre will absolve you of that. This parliament has a choice. It can choose truth, or it can choose a lie dressed up as action. We will oppose this legislation because honesty matters, because accountability matters. And if the government and others who helped create this mess refuse to say it out loud, rest assured we will. There are more people that need to be held accountable for the deliberate, abhorrent act of terrorism last Sunday. I wish some of them would step out of their offices and face accountability here. Those that marched and stood behind symbols of hate, marched and stood alongside people waving ISIS flags, Hamas flags, portraits of those who fund terrorism around the world, those that stood and marched while people chanted slogans that promote hate and violence, calling for global intifada, global jihad. Cameron Murphy, Steve Lawrence, Dr. Kane, Anthony Diadam, Penny Sharp, Abigail Boyd, Sue Higginson. There is no excuse. Once you saw those symbols, heard those chants, as members of Parliament, you should have disengaged from the event. To do so not gives the impression that Parliament, and for some of you, your government endorses those messages. This only emboldens those who would commit terror. Your actions, inactions, poor judgment played a part in allowing hate to fester and grow in our communities. What accountability lies in this legislation for your actions, inaction and poor judgment? None. Premier Minns, your inability to instil party discipline in your members who chose to engage in these public displays of hate and division played a part in creating an environment where terrorism was deemed acceptable for some. Your failure to act against your own when some of your members attempted to undermine this House's inquiry into anti-Semitism by downplaying the real threat. Your failure to act when some Sydney suburbs celebrated anti-Semitic attacks with fireworks while other suburbs mourned those attacks played a part in this. After the August 2025, when ASIO confirmed that Iran had directed at least 2 terrorist attacks in Australia, one being Sydney, why didn't the Premier request federal assistance or funding for our police force to be adequately equipped and trained to deal with real threats? Why didn't the Premier boost operational police funding in counter-terrorism activities? What accountability lies in this legislation for your actions, inaction and poor judgment and leadership? None. Staff at the New South Wales Firearms Registry, who ignored information available to New South Wales Police that they were known to ASIO and his son had links to ISIS and was a hate preacher. Ignored that the son had a licence for security that was revoked within 12 months. Staff that clearly had not learnt from their failings from the Edwards coronial inquest when they ignored the fact that John Edwards had a history of domestic violence. How many times does the Firearms Registry staff need to stuff up right royally before they are held accountable for the deaths that they enable? How many times of demonstrable criminal negligence is needed before someone in that department is truly held accountable? What accountability lies in this legislation for their actions, inactions, incompetence and negligence? None. Commissioner Mel Lanyon, when asked by media why it took 3 years from 2020 to 2023 for firearms licences to be approved, lied and said it just took a bit of extra time. Our office deals with individual firearms advocacy day in, day out. We know that in most circumstances, that maximum period it takes a firearms licence to be approved is 3 to 4 months. After that, we advise our constituency that the registry is clearly concerned about something. What concerns did they have that took an extraordinary 3 years to resolve? You can lie to the media, Commissioner, but try that with me in estimates. I will pursue you under the Parliamentary Evidence Act. What accountability lies in this legislation for the public deception of the Police Commissioner? None. Terrorists were recorded by ASIO in 2019 and returned to Australia from a Philippine terrorist training camp in late 2025. Why did the Australian Federal Police not have travel alerts on them? Why didn't the AFP itself act early against the terrorists involved? What accountability lies in this legislation for their actions or inaction? None. To ASIO, who knew that they had been radicalised and were a threat within society, but clearly made a conscious choice to sit off and not act. What accountability lies in this legislation for their actions or inactions? None. Prime Minister Albanese, who's issued directions to security agencies to refocus their resources away from Islamic extremism onto right-wing extremism, even if there was actionable intel, who openly avoids engagements with Jewish community, and when he speaks of the Jewish community, does through gritted teeth in an attempt to hide his own views, who wears T-shirts branded with slogans that make light of a Nazi concentration camp unit renowned for sexual exploitation of Jewish women. What accountability lies in this legislation for his actions, inaction, and poor leadership? None. Instead, you target legitimate businesses, families, good law-abiding citizens. That's who you're destroying and hurting, while running a protection racket for terrorists and murders. Since Sunday, I've watched and seen the ill-informed commentary from many in this place and the other place around existing firearm laws as you attempt to sell a narrative, as you attempt to deflect from your own failings, and the ignorance and idiocy is astounding. So let me educate you about what's involved in obtaining and maintaining a firearms licence in New South Wales. New South Wales firearm laws...
Order. I'm actually about to do this, I suspect. If it doesn't address... Order. Order. Stop the clock, please. If this doesn't address your point of order, Mr. Fang, please make it just once I've spoken. This is going to be a difficult debate. Tensions are high, I understand that, and everybody has a very valid perspective. But I would ask all members, please, to be respectful for all members. This is not going to work if particularly there are interjections sotto voce that are continuing throughout the debate. I ask all members to show respect to each other, and I'll start calling people to order if they don't. Mr. Fang, does that address your point of order? Thank you very much. The Honourable Mark Banasiak has the call.
Thank you, Mr. President. New South firearms law starts from the presumption that private possession is prohibited unless strictly justified. You must demonstrate a legally recognised genuine reason, such as primary production, recreational hunting or target shooting, firearms collecting, which is subject to additional restrictions, or business or occupational use, which is for security, professional animal control. Self-defence is not a genuine reason under New South Wales law. Evidence is required, for example, land ownership or written permission, membership of an approved shooting club, or proof of employment or business need. Before applying, you complete a firearm safety training course by an approved provider. This covers legislation and offences, safe handling and operation, storage and transportation laws, legal responsibilities and penalties. Before starting this course, you must complete a statutory declaration which covers the following. You must answer yes or no as to whether you have ever been convicted of a criminal offence, ever been charged with a serious offence, any offences involving violence, weapon, drugs or dishonesty, any offences overseas, any pending charges before a court. You are required to disclose spent convictions, juvenile matters where applicable. This form explicitly warns that non-disclosure is grounds for refusal or prosecution. You must declare whether you have ever been subject to an apprehended violence order, interim or final, been involved in domestic or personal violence incidents, been named in police reports related to family or domestic violence. This includes orders that have expired, orders that were not proven, situations where no charges resulted. You must answer as to whether you have suffered from mental illness or emotional instability, been treated for conditions that may affect judgment or impulse control, been admitted to a mental health facility, any condition that could make firearm possession unsafe. You must consent to police making inquiries with relevant authorities if required. This test is risk, not diagnosis, and not limited to current conditions. You must declare whether you have issues with alcohol abuse, used illicit drugs, been treated for substance dependency, have been involved in alcohol or drug-related offences. This all feeds directly into the fit and proper person assessment. You must explicitly acknowledge and declare that you are fit and proper person to hold a firearms licence, understand those responsibilities and legal obligations, and you accept that the licence is conditional and revocable. This is a formal statutory declaration. It's not a subjective opinion. You must acknowledge that you understand the storage requirements, comply with those laws, accept inspections and audits, and notify police of address or circumstances changing. You consent to police sharing your information, accessing criminal intelligence and court records, sharing that with other agencies, ongoing monitoring during the life of that licence. Without this consent, the application doesn't proceed. And you sign that declaration knowing that if any of that is false, you face the same consequences as anyone else for a false statutory declaration. When you submit that licence, all that is put in to the Firearms Registry for assessment. When it gets there, there is supposed to be a comprehensive background and suitability check. New South Wales are supposed to assess whether you're a fit and proper person. Criminal history, AVOs, domestic violence, mental health, substance abuse, police intelligence, all the stuff that I've just listed. Registry can seek additional information. They can already consult other agencies, and they can delay the decision while inquiries are made. If you're a first-time applicant, there is a minimum 28-day cooling-off period, regardless of urgency. This already deters impulsive ownership, allows thorough vetting, and reinforces that firearms are not consumer items. If approved, the licence is a fixed term, despite what the Premier said, typically 5 years or 2 years. It is limited to specific firearms categories, and it is tied to strict conditions regarding your genuine reason. Approval is not automatic, and refusal does not require proof beyond reasonable doubt, only that the issuing of the licence is not in the public interest. A licence doesn't allow you to immediately buy a firearm. For each firearm, you must apply for a permit to acquire, which involves justifying the need for that specific firearm, another background check, another waiting period, typically 28 days for the first firearm. This creates layered approvals, not a single point of access. Before you take possession of a firearm, you must have compliant storage, which includes approved safe or strong room, secure anchoring, ammunition stored separately, keys controlled and inaccessible to authorised persons. Police inspect storage arrangements, require evidence of compliance, conduct unannounced audits. Failures to comply can result in immediate seizure, licence suspension or cancellation, or criminal charges. Holding a firearms licence is a continuous responsibility. It is not a one-off approval. You must maintain your genuine reason, you store your firearms lawfully at all times, transport firearms legally and discreetly, notify police of changes in address or circumstances, comply with inspections, and renew your licence before expiry. New South Wales Police already retain broad powers to suspend or revoke a licence immediately, seize firearms without prior notice, act on new information or risk indicators, and these triggers include criminal charges, even before conviction, domestic disputes or AVOs, mental health episodes, raising safety concerns, breach of licence conditions, loss of genuine reason. Firearm ownership in New South Wales is conditional, it is revocable and privilege-based. Owners are essentially on a permanent good behaviour bond. Our office deals with individual firearm advocacy on a daily basis. We could cite hundreds of cases where someone's firearms licence has been suspended or revoked for a mere report of raised voices from a neighbour. I can tell of hundreds of cases where even victims of domestic violence have had their licence suspended after reporting that domestic violence to police. I can tell you of 100 cases where licences have been revoked because relatives that don't even reside with the firearm owner have questionable backgrounds. So what accountability lies in this legislation for the 260,000 licensed firearm owners who every day comply with the aforementioned requirements? Everything. You are making my community a fall guy for your failings, a doormat for your departmental incompetence, and a patsy for poor leadership. The tools existed for New South Wales Firearms Registry to act. They failed to do so. The questions you all need to ask yourself is why? Why did they fail to do their job? The tools existed for the ASIO and the AFP to do their job. Why did they fail? What in this legislation stops that failure occurring again? Will any of you honestly do that? From what the Australian public has seen over the last week, the answer to that question is no. All you seem to understand is bums on seats. All you seem to care about is getting into power and staying in power. You think you can say one thing to ethnic communities in Western Sydney and another to those in the North Shore, while screwing both of them over in the process. That's your choice. To that end, I say this. The Shooters Fishers Farmers Party will be fielding lower house candidates in every single seat who supports this legislation. We will pour resources and volunteers in that seat, encouraging and reminding your local communities how you support running cover for terrorists while putting Aussies out of business and making criminals out of law-abiding firearm owners. We will not discriminate between red, blue or green of any shade. Here's what it might look like in some of your seats. Penrith, 1.6% margin. We have 2,849 licensed law-abiding firearm owners. East Hills, 1.7% margin. 2,617 licensed firearm owners. Monero, 2.3% margin. We have 12,113 licensed firearm owners. Camden, 3%. We have 4,515 licensed firearm owners. Riverstone, 3.7% margin. We have 6,628 licensed firearm owners. South Coast, 3.8% margin. We have 5,933 licensed firearm owners. Ballina, 6.2% margin. We have 4,214 licensed firearm owners. This will continue until such time that the local member A supports reversing these laws and B openly supports detaining and deporting all known terrorists and terrorist sympathisers in our community without delay. Legislation should be evidence-based, not reactionary, not driven by misguided emotion, no matter how understandable that emotion is. And it most certainly is understandable. We all feel it, but the evidence doesn't lie, unlike our current state and federal leaders. The evidence tells you that a licensed firearm owner is not the risk. According to New South Wales Police and Criminology Research Council reporting over the last decade, less than 0.5% of firearm-related offences in New South Wales involved licensed firearm holders. The overwhelming majority of firearm crime involves unregistered, illegally imported or stolen firearms. Long guns held by primary producers and sporting shooters are statistically negligible in serious violent crime. In other words, the cohort targeted by this bill is already the lowest risk group in the system. As the New South Wales Audit Office has previously noted in Firearms Administration reviews, compliance rates among the licensed firearm holders are consistently high, with breaches largely administrative rather than criminal in nature. Yet this bill treats compliance as suspicion and participation as a liability. Dr. Samara McPhedran is one of the most authoritative and experienced firearms and violent crime researchers in Australia. For more than 2 decades, she has rigorously examined firearms violence, homicide, and the actual effects of Australian gun laws, including the 1996 National Firearms Agreement. She is widely published in leading peer-reviewed criminology and public health journals and has produced some of the most comprehensive statistical analysis of firearms legislation and crime outcomes in this country. Her work is repeatedly cited in serious national and international policy discussions. Crucially, her firearms research is grounded in deep expertise in homicide, intimate partner violence and femicide. Dr. McPhedran's authority in firearms and crime research is exceptional, long-standing and unmatched in the Australian research landscape. So what does she say on these matters? Well, she says, while legal firearm numbers and licences in Australia have steadily increased, firearm crime has long been declining. She says lawful ownership does not drive violent crime. She says even as a registered firearms increase, violent crime continues to decline. She says this clearly disproves claims that more legal firearms increases risk to public safety. She says New South Wales and national data confirm what past research has long shown: lawful ownership is not a driver of violent firearm crime. She says public policy needs to be driven by evidence, and the evidence clearly highlights that the focus needs to be on the criminal possession and misuse of illicit firearms, not punishing responsible law-abiding licensed owners. This bill ignores decades of that evidence and expertise. It chooses ideology over evidence and rhetoric over facts. The consequences of this bill will not be evenly felt across New South Wales. They will fall hardest on regional and outer metropolitan electorates, where firearms are tools of work, land management and community participation. Let me give the House some concrete examples. Barwon. In the electorate of Barwon, properties routinely span tens of thousands of hectares. Travel times between homesteads, paddocks, boundary fences can exceed an hour. Producers in Barwon rely on multiple firearms for wild dog control along stock routes, feral pig eradication near waterways, humane destruction of injured livestock. Imposing a blanket four-limit ban in Barwon is not a safety measure, it is an operational failure. A producer from near Bourke explained, when dogs come through, you don't have time to drive back to one central safe. You need the right tool where the problem is. These laws are written like the bush doesn't exist. This bill was clearly not drafted with electorates like Barwon in mind. Murray and Riverina. In the Murray, feral pigs, deer, foxes are causing widespread damage to irrigation infrastructure, native riverbanks, cropping land, threatened species habitat. Local land services data from the Murray region shows that coordinated pest control programs involving licensed recreational shooters have reduced feral pig activity by more than 60% in targeted zones. If licensing becomes more restrictive, participation drops and the pests rebound rapidly. A Riverina land care coordinator warned, if you make it harder for licensed shooters to stay licensed, pest numbers don't stay stable, they explode. This legislation risks undoing years of environmental recovery work. In New England, shooting clubs are not fringe hobbies. They are core community institutions. Clubs in Armidale, Inverell, Glen Innes provide safety training, maintain strict compliance, host state and national competitions, attract regional tourism. Mandatory club membership combined with increasing administrative pressure risks overwhelming volunteer-run organisations. A New England club president wrote to me and said, we're already stretched keeping the range open and compliant. If memberships surge because people are forced to join without funding or support, the system will break. When clubs close, safety oversight and training capacity disappears with them. If we turn to the Upper Hunter, in Upper Hunter, firearms are used across the thoroughbred breeding operations, broadacre farming, mining buffer zones, wildlife management corridors. Limiting firearm access in this electorate ignores the complexity of land use and the need for rapid, humane wildlife control, particularly around transport corridors and high-value livestock areas. A stud manager near Scone stated, wildlife strikes and injured animals are a real risk here. Firearms are about safety and welfare as well. These amendments introduce risk where none currently exists. South Coast and Monero. In Monero and the South Coast, communities are still dealing with post-bushfire ecological imbalance following the 2019-20 fires. Feral deer and pigs moved into regenerating habitats, native species faced increased pressure, and licensed shooters were critical to recovery efforts. Restricting access now undermines long-term environmental restoration. A Monero landholder told my office, after the fires, shooters helped us protect what was left. Now the government wants to push them out. This is not good conservation policy, it's contradiction. The outer metropolitan electorates, the small business impact, even in these outer metropolitan electorates like Hawkesbury, like Camden, like Wellandilly, firearms-related businesses are significant employers. Gun shops, rangers, instructors operate legally, transparently, and under intense scrutiny. A Hawkesbury retailer said, every extra hoop means fewer customers. This bill doesn't hurt criminals, it hurts compliant businesses trying to survive. These are local jobs, local families, local economies. No one has even bothered to consider the defence of our nation. We have many firearms manufacturers in this state that provide for both civilian and defence customers. Many of them can't survive in losing 90% of one half of that revenue. To quote Jeff Bacon, Managing Director of Oceana Precision, a regional small arms manufacturing company in the New England, these amendments, if passed, will have immediate unintended consequences that will affect our defence sovereignty. Our main domestic product are straight pull centrefire rifles. Straight pull rifles are to be recategorised to a high category C, essentially prohibiting them from the majority of licence holders. We simply cannot survive without domestic sales. This legislation change will destroy my company, causing its bankruptcy, inevitable collapse and liquidation. The consequence being our national defence capabilities and sovereignty will be dramatically impacted. There is one element of the bill that even many non-firearm owners has found complexing, which is the removal of NCAT appeals. Allow me to elaborate how NCAT appeals work for firearm owners. NCAT appeals normally occur after an internal review of a decision by the registry has failed. This internal review can take some time to complete, Before proceeding to an NCAT hearing, there is a period of time where a matter can be pulled, hence not appearing on the online register of cases. There are two reasons why a matter might be pulled. One is that the firearm owner withdraws. The other is if New South Wales Police move to mediation and concede to issue the licence approval with conditions. If a matter does go to the hearing, police often frequently use Section 64 of the Civil Administrative Tribunal Act 2013, which removes firearm owner and representatives from the room and secret evidence is disclosed about them. From my office's research, in all circumstances, this request from police has always been granted by NCAT. So the government's justification that this has to do with the feds being concerned about intelligence being leaked is BS. Police already consistently use this tool available to them. If I go back to the deceptive answer of Police Commissioner Mal Lanyon as to why the registry took 3 years to approve licences, I submit to the House that this is the real reason it took so long and why the government has truly inserted this provision. I submit that the father applied for a licence, was potentially knocked back initially. It then went to eternal review or straight to NCAT appeal, where at some point it was pulled by registry and through mediation they issued him his licence with or without conditions, with or without political interference. Or it did proceed to a hearing, and for some reason it doesn't appear in the register. As a party that deals with these matters day in, day out, and in consultation with firearms law experts, this is the only explanation that fits that 3-year timeline. This is just one reason why this legislation is premature and misguided. It's why only a Royal Commission or a special judicial inquiry will show where the true failings lie. That should happen before any legislation is passed. Therefore, I foreshadow that I will be moving amendments at the end of the second read, end of the third read, potentially to refer this bill to a committee and also split the bill off so that could be heard.